Hi everyone, welcome to the S.O.A.P. I'm Mike. We've got Corey and Dan here talking about the E3 Expo recently. Corey, take it away. What's the E3 Expo all about?
So the E3 Expo is a yearly event where the biggest game developers and publishers show off what their, big plans are for the next 12 months or even longer in the future. They take sort of all the well-known ones, Bethesda, EA, Ubisoft, all the major game developers, and they announce their, either major reoccurring titles or new titles that they think will entice fans to go to that company and play their new games.
Essentially, when you look at E3, it's a roadmap of their future. Now, most of it will be the year coming, so the following year after the conference. Sometimes they will bring out a bit of a teaser for something that's going to be in the future, maybe 2 or 3 years away. They're a bit rarer, but they're the ones that are very AAA titles, the ones that are going to be the big brand names of that company. In general, though, it's normally what's going to come out, normally towards the end of the year or start of the next year. And I guess in recent times, we've been seeing a change in tradition. We still see a lot of information and they have big conferences and that, but a lot of the information is now getting leaked before it even comes to the conference, whereas in the past, you'd watch the conference to get the newest information. So when you look at it now, you know what titles are going to be shown there for the most part because someone always leaks it and it's not as exciting as it used to be. But in saying that, there's still plenty to be learned there. And they, on top of that, you get to hear the developers actually talking about what they're going to be bringing out. And you always get those quirky or awkward performances from someone. So it's something that I've always wanted to travel to. It's one of those things that I hope when I have the money to and I can go to America, that's one of the kind of things that I'd like to actually visit over there. But for the meantime, just watch it online because they stream everything live so that you can watch it as it's happening. And then, obviously, if you didn't catch it, you can rewatch it through YouTube.
Okay, so let's look at the conferences. We'll start with EA.
Well, EA released a couple of well-known titles and some that were dropped with a little bit more of a surprise. They went back to their sort of trusted roots with the new Battlefield, Battlefield 5, and the inclusion of a Battle Royale mode, which, honestly, I played sort of the original Battlefields a little bit. Not my sort of game, but the inclusion of the Battle Royale mode, from what I understand about it, it seems like it's something different in a sense, but also trying to latch on to the success, I think, of other games that aren't as tied to it, like Fortnite and that sort of stuff, and the boom in those sort of Battle Royale style games.
I guess the thing with Battlefield now adding it, because everyone else is also adding it as well, does this become the new zombie mode? You know, Call of Duty made the zombies mode so popular that they couldn't release another game without having a zombie mode. They've now got a game that is Battle Royale coming out. You know, is Battle Royale essentially the new zombie mode that's going across all games at the moment?
Yeah, I think it is basically at this point because, like you said, the zombie mode when it came out was such a big thing, and most people who weren't avid first-person shooter players would get it solely for that mode. Whereas now, with, like I said, the boom of Fortnite and PUBG and those sort of Battle Royale style games, I think that the inclusion of it is going to lead to I think they're going to completely remove the zombie mode in most games, and replace it with that, like you said.
Do you think it comes to a bust at some point? You talk about the boom of Battle Royale, but when's the bust? Everyone seems to be doing it. You had PUBG, you've got Fortnite, now Battlefield, Call of Duty, everyone's going to be doing it. How quickly do we get burnt out on a mode that's now across all games?
Every game mode busts eventually. Like, that's just the way of video game nature. But I think when they start shoving so many Battle Royale game modes into so many different titles, it's going to burn out a lot quicker than what it would have if it just stayed as Fortnite and PUBG and the games that I guess sort of created that environment of gaming. I think when you start throwing it into Battlefield, and if they start doing it in Call of Duty, that sort of thing, it's going to burn out a lot quicker because they're going to drain I guess, the life out of that particular style of game.
Well, I mean, some of the other stuff that they released was the sports titles. Where's its Battle Royale mode?
The Battle Royale mode is in NHL. You throw a hard enough hit and it starts an all-in brawl. That's basically the Battle Royale mode, Dan. There's actually the one thing about the sports games, because there's not a whole lot to talk about EA Sports games, if we're being honest. They re-release the same title with a slightly improved graphics and then charge you $100 for the game and $150 to improve your team in whatever game mode you're playing. It's gotten to the point now where it's blatantly money grabbing, but they do well with it, so I can't really complain. The thing that they got, which really surprised me, was FIFA in particular gained the rights to the Champions League, the European competition, which for a very, very long time was held by PES, the rival soccer game company. And that's a big deal because they have mentioned previously they weren't even going to bother attempting to get it because there was no need.
So what do you think has caused the change in that model? Is it that FIFA's getting too stale, or what's the difference there?
I think that because PES have started to, I guess slowly, and I mean very, very slowly, start to re-catch up to them in terms of the game itself. But the one thing PES always had over EA was that they had the rights to the Champions League, which is the biggest European competition in the world. But now that EA have taken it off them, they've been left with nothing. They don't have rights to any actual teams, as far as I know. They now don't have the rights to Champions League. They have the rights to certain players, but other than that, they really don't have a leg to stand on anymore.
EA is obviously one of the bigger publishers out there, or they are the biggest publisher out there. And you always start with EA because they're so big, they do things so well. When they did the sports titles, am I the only one who felt like they were a bit cringeworthy with the guy coming out with the big belt on there talking about the struggles he'd had and how he overcame them to make his tournament win? And was I the only one that found that cringy, or was that a genuine general consensus?
Oh God, no! It was super cringy. I think because they now have the competitive FIFA, the Interactive World Cup, and that sort of stuff, where they bring players from all over the world to compete against each other in just FIFA tournaments. It's brought out, I guess, a new side of just regular gamers who now think they're celebrities because they're good at one particular video game. I know they used to have it in the past with COD and all that sort of stuff, and a lot of clans or whatever they are now have YouTube channels and try and build off of that. But when you take a complete nerd who spends their whole life playing video games and then put them onto a mainstay stage, they don't know what the hell they're doing. How are they supposed to interact with a room full of people when I don't think they've even spoke to more than 3 people in the last 12 months?
Yeah, it was a very odd thing watching that unfold. That was, to be honest, I wasn't watching it live because it was on so early, so I actually skipped forward past the sports things. I don't know if there was stuff, like I play the NFL games and that, I don't know if there was stuff I was missing or that with it. I couldn't watch that part of the show. What I did really like was Unravel, how pretty that game was. Now they had the surprise announcing that got released straight away.
Yeah, that was a massive bombshell that I think everyone knew Unravel 2 was coming. It wasn't super well hidden. It wasn't a massive surprise. But the fact that they announced it and then 5 minutes later turned around and went, oh yeah, by the way, it's now released. That was such a random surprise. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the only game at E3 that was announced and released at the same time, which is a pretty big deal considering there was a lot of hype around Unravel, the initial one, that a lot of people were looking forward to the second one.
Yeah, I know they did, skipping a few conferences, Fallout Shelter, which had already been available on mobile devices, did actually get released straight on the spot. And there was also the Elder Scrolls had some stuff that got announced on the spot as well. So it wasn't the only one that had a bit of a, bam, here it is. But certainly it's the first one to get to the punchline, and that's always so important with anything that anyone does. So that was a huge one, and the game looks really, really pretty.
It also focuses heavily on drop-in, drop-out co-op, which I know that there's a lot of MMO-style games that get released every year and that sort of thing, but I like the fact that they're going back to the old school roots of just, even if it's just on the same console, you have two people sitting in a room with two controllers playing a co-op game to help yourself solve puzzles. It's not something that sort of pops up in platformers or even any sort of game anymore as much as what it used to, so it's nice to see it sort of nod back to the old school sort of games.
Yeah, I've long said that the couch co-op is dead. If you think about things like Halo and things like that, where split screen was so important, it was all about sitting in front of the TV with other people, interacting and enjoying that experience. Once the internet took over and everything became online, couch co-op started to die quite badly, because the assumption was you just go online and play online, then no one has to leave their house. But I'm a huge fan. I know, Mike, we've played so many games on the couch side by side.
Yep.
But it got to the point where like games would be coming out and be like, oh, what are we going to play together? And then starting to realize, you know, me and Mike could no longer play games anymore because they didn't have split screen. You'd have to play it online. And so any game that does the couch co-op always gets points in my book.
Well, I think that was one of the bigger announcements from them, especially with the sudden drop of it and that sort of stuff. But a little less known game that sort of went under the radar a bit that I know you were very sort of passionate about prior to this when we were discussing it, Dan, was Sea of Solitude.
Sea of Solitude is such a... Even now, I still struggle to describe what you're looking at with that game. It's very interesting because they gave whoever was hosting it, I can't remember, but whoever's hosting it gave this big spiel about, you know, how they were interested in developers who had passion and wanted to do their own thing. And then they announced this game, and it's a very small developer. It's not one of the big ones that we're all used to. And the intro for it was talking about how passionate this studio was. You know, even though they were so small, they had this great idea. But you're sitting there watching it going, what the fuck's this guy on about? Like, just fucking show us some cool gameplay or whatever. But this is a game that isn't really about the gameplay. And when they came on stage, they described it very much as essentially it's like an artistic expression of the developer's own emotions and feelings. The character she's turned herself into a monster, and you're finding out why she did this. And essentially, as she's exploring the world and that, and you play as this character, you're learning about her storyline, and that's far more important than any of the gameplay. It's the way that they artistically express things like fear and depression and all these emotions, how they come through, that is so much more important than anything else you're going to do. And so this one was such a unique take on what this game is going to be. I really think that if it's done right, if it's as they intend it to be, that no other game is really going to match that kind of level. So I'm very excited by it. I have no idea what I'm excited for, but I know I'm excited for it.
See, that's the sort of surprise from games that you don't see a whole lot anymore, where they're not so much focused on having cutting-edge technology and breaking down new styles of gameplay and that sort of stuff, but more focused on telling a story, which I can't remember the name of the game for the life of me, but there was another game that came out a few years ago very similar to this, where it was a boy that you follow the story of, and it's in sort of sepia tone, black and white. And it was a very similar premise, where the actual gameplay itself was very lackluster and really didn't have a whole lot of depth to it. But the story itself made you want to keep playing the game. I feel as though this is going to be very, very similar to that, where there's not going to be a whole lot of actual gameplay mechanics or anything like that that stand out, but the story itself will want to make you play it from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think anyone that does something different, because we're looking at an industry that, 20 years ago you could make a game and it could be very unique. But now so many people have done it, and technology's come so far that it's enabled so many possibilities. Anyone who can do something different and unique is a very special place in the industry. And it may not be as high graphics as, the latest Battlefield or something like that. But if you can tell the story in a way that someone hasn't, even with a book, like books, every time you see a movie or a book come out, you're always like, oh, we've seen that before. But it's about putting a unique spin on it. And this is one of those things that just fits in like its own unique space. And that alone earns it the right to stand on the big stage, even though it's a smaller game.
Oh, I 100% agree. It's so different, which isn't something you can say about a lot of games today, which really did impress me about it. Something that didn't impress me a whole lot, and I've been very vocal about my disappointment in this, was the announcement of Star Wars Jedi: The Fallen Order. And basically the developers' reluctancy to give any details and the look of basically panic whenever he was asked about any details about the game. Why announce a game when you don't want to give a single detail about it? It just does not make sense to me.
I think I have an answer for it, and I could be very, very wrong. I was a big fan of Visceral, who did the Dead Space games. And Dead Space is that game that every year I sit there waiting for someone to bring back Dead Space. But the studio, after Dead Space, they moved on and they kind of just got bounced around. They did a bit of work on the Need for Speed series, but they were working on one of the Star Wars games. Now, that studio collapsed because so many things changed. I think there was the 1851 or whatever it was called.
Yeah, I remember that. If I remember correctly, it was a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, everyone loved all the details that they got thrown at. And, that's the game that people have been expecting for Star Wars for so long, is right there. But when they collapsed, there was this big story about the curse of Star Wars and how many titles would get announced for a Star Wars thing and they would have like catastrophic failures for that studio. And so I feel like the curse of Star Wars is probably gripping these guys in terms of they don't want to announce too much because that curse is likely to take hold of them. The only thing that's really gotten through recently has been Battlefront, and look at how much, controversy they've gone through just to be able to get there. Before that, you had Force Unleashed, which is a very different take on things. So I guess Star Wars games, like in the 90s, you had LucasArts publishing some of the greatest games that we've ever seen. And then, that went all the way through the Jedi Academies and all that. When we look at the Star Wars games now, I mean, we're getting flooded with movies. The games have been trying to flood us, but have had so much pushback. And the theory is that coming from now Disney before LucasArts, that when you do a Star Wars games, it gets managed way too much in terms of you as a person will have to put a request through as to what you're going to do, and then that goes through to your manager, who then needs to get it approved with the publisher, who will then need to get it approved with LucasArts or Disney or that kind of stuff. And so to get something done within one of these games, there's a lot of hands that something passes through. So the reality is, making a Star Wars game like this, the details probably aren't finalized because they're still waiting on approval from someone who is then going to pass it on to someone else to get it approved, and so on and so forth. So I think Star Wars, until a Star Wars game is about to get released, you're never going to really see the details because the likelihood is it's going to change so quickly.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I did forget a lot about the game that was supposed to be released that never did, because I was in the same sort of category. I was really looking forward to that game, and then it disappeared. In the same sort of scope of things, they initially went to bring out a Republic Commando 2, which I don't know whether you played the first one.
Oh, I loved the first one. First one was so amazing.
Thank you. No one else I know has enjoyed that game. That is one of my favorite games of all time. I really enjoyed that game. And the game ended on a cliffhanger, which led into what was supposed to be the second game that just never appeared.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, Battlefront 3 was supposed to be released years and years and years ago. but got held up to the point where they went, screw it, we'll restart and just make a brand new series, renamed it Battlefront. Just completely forgot the old games even existed.
It's because it got sold.
Well, but it's still not that hard to, when you're the people that invented the entire universe that the game revolves around, it's really not that hard to go, okay, we've lost it, but we can still rebuild it from there. It shouldn't have taken as long as what it did to release a new Battlefront.
Yeah, I think that comes down to the developer of the Battlefront series. They had a lot of issues going there, and we've seen it so many times with Duke Nukem, things like that. Once you end up down that spiral, it's very hard to come out of that spiral, and I think that's what happened with Battlefront. And then they got sold, went over to DICE, who picked it up, who make Battlefield already, so it's like, all right, well, now you have a publisher, a developer who already does that kind of thing. You know, let's give them a crack at it. And obviously they put their time and effort into finishing the game that should have been already finished. They just wanted to restart. It's their game now, so it became Battlefront 1 again. Which, look, honestly, I'm happy with. I don't know that the original Battlefront games were that big a deal. I do think the new ones add something there, but there's still a lot of work to go.
Really? You prefer the new Battlefront games to the originals?
Oddly. I do.
That's odd to me. I don't know. It's just, don't get me wrong, they fixed a major problem I had with the game in 2 than what, like the major issue I had in 1, which was 1 felt super repetitive after a while. They didn't change the missions up. They didn't give you multiple things you could do. It was just very cut and dry. Whereas number 2, you can go to a planet and have 3 different sets of missions to do. They changed it, which was quite nice, but the original part of, I guess, the original Battlefront that I really enjoyed was the story mode was very different to what it is in the newer installments, where the gameplay was basically just a team deathmatch, but you had objectives. It was really nice, whereas the storyline in this one is a proper storyline, which isn't bad, don't get me wrong. I quite enjoyed the story, but it took away from one of the main things I enjoyed from the originals.
Yeah, I think the thing is they're very much been listening to the community. I know there was a lot of outcry over loot boxes, and I think there might have been some things that they needed to fix with what they were going to do, but they listened. And they probably went a bit further than they needed to make sure everyone was happy. Is the game perfect? No, it's still not perfect. Are they still doing stuff with it? Well, yes, we're seeing with Han Solo. They did the first bit of the content before the game, before E3, and now they've been doing the new mode just came out, new skins, that kind of stuff. So they're still adding things. You're not paying for it, which is the important part. So I really think that, like, their EA, when they announced the updates for Battlefront, probably not a huge thing, but it's still important that they're still listening and still working on it. The big one, though, like, everyone was waiting for Anthem. People still, I don't think, know where to sit with Anthem. And the big problem is not what they're showing you, it's what the studio has done in the past. Now, it's made by BioWare, who are one of the most prestigious developers in gaming history. They've made the Mass Effect games, they started Dragon Age, they've done so much in terms of winning fan love. Once they got purchased by EA, I've got to say that the quality of their games really took a dive, mainly in the storytelling department. The story seemed to become less important than the little catchy things like multiplayer and that. And I think because they're putting effort into multiplayer, they're losing out on the storyline. Now, games like The Witcher show us we don't need to have multiplayer. We can just have straight storyline. People will love it. People will buy it. So Anthem is the game that after Andromeda, where all the resources were taken from Andromeda into Anthem, and until they realized, oh shit, we've gone too far, Andromeda's not going to make it, we need to take the resources back. Was sacrificing Andromeda worth it for this game?
I don't think it was, because I've mentioned this to you before that I really, really enjoyed Mass Effect Andromeda. It was different enough from the original games that it felt fresh, but also similar enough that you could tell it was a Mass Effect game, which is, I think, the main point when you're doing a consecutive series. You don't want to add a new title that is just, what the hell is this? Completely different from what you've used previously. I'm really sort of, like you've mentioned, on the fence with Anthem in terms of, because like you mentioned, it took away from Andromeda. I think if you hadn't have taken away from Andromeda, Andromeda would have been a much cleaner, nicer game. But now you've put the aspects from Mass Effect that you've taken, put them with Destiny, created some weird love child, and named it Anthem. That's pretty much what I gather from the announcement of this game. But don't get me wrong, it looks alright from what I've seen. I haven't sort of looked too much into it because a bit salty about the whole Mass Effect incident, but yeah, I can't talk badly about it. It just looks very... I'm trying to think of the word. I guess the word is mainstream. It's just mashing two very well-known games together and hoping it works.
I think the thing is, Destiny's been dying. I don't know that Destiny ever took off to such a huge successful level. But obviously they've sold plenty of copies of the game, both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. But during both of those games, critics were always very highly vocal about the shortcomings of Destiny. You're talking about great running, jumping, shooting mechanics mixed with really poor storytelling, not enough content, and very repetitive gameplay. Now, wherever you want to sit on there, there's definitely room to take over from Destiny. And it feels like when an Anthem was announced in the very start, everyone thought, why would you announce this when we have Destiny? Now we're seeing that it's going to be released, next year? And it's at the point where Destiny hasn't been doing well. Number 2 there was pretty vocal criticism with number 2. Then the DLC came, and that's when it really hit, that the content coming after the game wasn't going to be crash shot either. Now, with number 1, the Taken King brought everyone back. It said, we've listened to you. We're going to undo all that badness. We're going to fix it. And they brought a lot of players back in. With Destiny 2, I don't know that you can do that a second time. Once you've burnt people enough, they're not going to come back. So I feel like Anthem is actually now sitting in the perfect position that when it releases, the game that it's closest to, Destiny, is going to be doing poor enough and people are going to have had it around for long enough that they're going to be ready to jump ship. And if Anthem does it right, and that's a big question, is based on Andromeda and things like that, if they do it right, they can take over Destiny and essentially wipe Destiny out, or force Destiny to rise to a whole new level.
Yeah, I'll pay that, but I don't know. It's one of the biggest titles that they announced that I'm going to have to wait and see how it goes before I make a final judgment. A lot of the games that they announce, you can sort of have a look at and go, yeah, that looks okay, or that's going to be rubbish, or that looks super repetitive. But this one to me is one of the ones where until it's released, there's not enough detail that you can make a clear judgment answer on it.
All right, so that was EA, and now let's have a talk about Microsoft. What was their main thing?
So the biggest title, I guess, Microsoft releases when they do these announcements, and the one that I don't know if I really look forward to it anymore, but I know a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Is the Halo franchise, and they've brought it up again with the newest release, which is Infinite, I believe. Now, the amount of details they've given about it, as far as I know, are quite limited, but it's a Halo game. What you see is what you get. They don't really change up too much from the later installments, but you never know. They could include something that surprises everyone.
I guess the question is, obviously Halo is created by Bungie. So when we look at Halo, we think of how good Halo 1 to 3 were. Now, after that, 343 took over. with having already done ODST, which is a decent enough game. It wasn't perfect, mind you, but it was...
I'd just like to point out ODST, I think, is the lowest rated Halo game they've ever released.
Yeah, but it still did it did different things, which is important when doing a side story. And like I said, it was still a solid enough game. Now, they were still piggybacking off the work that Bungie had done at the time, but they did the important thing of adding Nathan Fillion in ODST. When Bungie did leave to go over and start making Destiny, 343 took over completely. Now, at that time, they were still using the same engine, and so the game still felt the same. But you instantly felt with number 4 that there was something not perfect there. Something that wasn't happening with the first 3 games, all of a sudden was happening. And the most important thing from when I played it, and I loved number 4 still, was that the world, the characters, none of it was explained very well. You added a whole new race, and it seemed as though you were meant to know all about them, even though they never introed that race to you. And I think part of that is that the race already existed in the books. So there was already, this pre-knowledge for big fans, but for 90% of the people that are playing these games, it was a very confusing thing. And they explained some things, but it was always this weird, what's going on. When we moved on to number 5, though, 343, they couldn't use the same engine because there's different generation of consoles. We'd moved on from the 360 onto the Xbox One. So this is where you really see a studio work out where it belongs. And they put in a lot of work for Halo 5. They had Nightfall come out, which I loved. I know other people weren't as happy with it, but I really enjoyed the story for Nightfall and the character that they introduced through that series. But adding Nathan Fillion back into it, having the character from Nightfall, who I still thought was a solid character, all this money, all this advertising, they put everything into it. But when the game came out, the game didn't feel like Halo. And a lot of people talked about the competitive side. So for multiplayer, they said that was a lot better. Now, I didn't really play much of the multiplayer. I can't really comment on it. But what I can tell you about is the single player felt very drastically different. It didn't feel like Halo anymore. I really didn't enjoy that. And that was the first time playing a Halo game that I sat there going, I mean, I guess I'll finish it, but I really don't enjoy this storyline. And I'm watching Nathan Fillion, who I'm a huge fan of, in this role. You're seeing Master Chief, who you followed for so long, Katana. There's so much that you could love about it, but the whole time I sat there going, this isn't my thing. So, the question is, do they redeem themselves? Halo 6, is it enough, to piggyback off what they had in the past, and can they now make the storyline that they should have made, or will they keep down that same path and not deliver on another game?
It's a 50-50. They're either going to rebuild what Halo was, and weirdly enough, I really do rather the original Halos, like massively, compared to sort of 4 onwards, which I know isn't sort of everyone's cup of tea, because a lot of people do like 4 and 5 and the newer game mechanics and all that sort of stuff, but I grew up with Halo 1. Halo 1 came out when I was very, very little. It was one of the first games I ever played. And it was one of the games that got me into video games in general. It was so different from everything else I'd played, and it was just incredible to me. But the more and more I've played of the newer games, I just have lost, I guess, interest in it. And this is a really dick thing to say, but I really don't have an interest in Halo 6 even after the announcement, because I feel like they're just going to dig that hole more. The only thing about Halo 6 that even remotely makes me excited and has nothing to do with the game itself is, and I know you'd be excited for it, Dan, is that hopefully a new season of Red vs. Blue.
I don't know, that show's gone on quite some time. Rooster Teeth do amazing work, and if you are working at Rooster Teeth, please keep doing amazing work, but I can't be excited for Red versus Blue anymore. And Rooster Teeth do so many other amazing things that I think are definitely a lot better. You can't. It's kind of like Halo. It's just it belongs in the past. Like what happened a while ago was so great. Season 1 of Red versus Blue was so amazing, and then what Rooster Teeth managed to do out of Red versus Blue in terms of the whole, company is amazing. Halo's the same. Halo invented so much. It made Microsoft, the Xbox. Without Halo, the Xbox may not be sitting here. But now, the thing about the Microsoft conference that I felt is that they've been doing damage control for so long. They created this console that has this hardware that's great. Its numbers are always great on paper. But they're never getting the use out of all of that software, that hardware. Everything that they're building there is not coming together. And a big part of that is that their games aren't selling. And you've got to look at Halo and also Gears of War and go, well, there's your big reason. Sony have so many. They've got the Uncharted's, Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War. Sony have so much on their side that people want. Like God of War is just such a big thing, like recently, that you have to have it. That's why we did a whole podcast on it. Gears of War, just like Halo, I was looking at Gears of War and look, I enjoyed the original ones. I can't say I was the biggest fan of them, but I bought the collector's edition of Gears of War 4 and it has Troy Baker in it. He was just at Supernova. There's some really great things there, but you're looking at what Gears of War 4 was, and Horde mode, I really, really loved, but the storyline, the single player, it felt clunky. It felt outdated. The storyline didn't feel that well written. Troy Baker, who I can fall in love with in a million games, I'm watching his character and it was average at best. The only saving grace of that storyline was Marcus still being in it. And I mean, once again, that's part of the past. The whole point of that game was a new generation. JD is Marcus's son. It's bringing in the new generation of Gears, and you should be wanting JD, not Marcus. But all you care about is the past. So, all these new studios that they're buying, they're trying to stem that flow of all these fans that they're losing. At what point do we look at Microsoft and go, you're trying, but nothing you do will actually fix this problem you have?
I don't know. See, I don't agree with that general consensus of the storylines from Gears being, I guess, subpar from what they expect. Just everyone goes on about how they don't draw you in the way they should for a video game that is as big as Gears. But in saying that, you can't have that be a main topic, but also rate Dom's death in Gears as one of the saddest deaths in video games, which it is in many, many people's opinions.
But that, again, we're going back in the past. Dom's death, that is amazing. Gears 1 to 3, amazing. Like I said, I'm not going to say that they're my favorite games ever, but you can see why they were such a huge seller of their time. Gears of War 4 does never live up to that. Not even close to it.
No, but the difference between, I guess, the opinion I had with Halo and the opinion I have with Gears is you brought in a whole new generation, like you mentioned, of Gears with Marcus's son and all that sort of stuff. But that's one game where you've tried to shove in a bunch of people and you're sort of like, well, I want Marcus back. I feel as though if you give Gears time, it'll be a different situation to Halo. Halo has had multiple opportunities and tried to branch out into new characters and new plots, that sort of thing, but it just hasn't worked. And no one at the very first time Halo went, okay, let's bring in a new story, went, oh, well, this is shit. But that seems to be what's happening with Gears. I'm going to give Gears an opportunity to expand on what they did in the last game. If it can draw me in with the next game and go, okay, don't get me wrong, I'll miss Marcus, but this is still exciting to me with the new generation, then you can't knock it because it's don't get me- like number 4 obviously will be that sort of middle ground where everyone's on the fence. But if you can then push everyone to one side of the fence and say that it's good, then it has its purpose.
I think people are more not on the fence, but they're starting to jump off the fence at 4. I think it was bad enough that there was some things that were great about it. Like I said, the Horde mode I really enjoyed, was really fun, but the characters that they added were not solid characters. And we've gone from JD being the main character to, from what I saw in the conference, Caitlin, I think her name was, is now the main character. Now, she was probably more likable than JD, which once again I find so surprising considering Troy Baker was JD. But if you look at it, like even JD as a character has completely changed from 4 to 5. It's kind of like they realized that the 4 was just so terrible, we'll use a couple of things from it, but we're moving on.
But isn't that what you want from a game? Like I said, they had a trial. Every game needs that trial period to see whether they can branch out and do something different and whether their fans will like it or not. But that doesn't mean that everyone's going to.
Yeah, I think the point is 4 was such a letdown that 5 we look at tentatively. And like I said, it's part of the problem that Microsoft have at the moment. They're losing fans to Sony constantly. And I feel like Gears of War 4, Halo 5 both did that. They now have the chance to prove everyone wrong. And there's nothing greater than a success story where someone was down and then managed to pick themselves up and succeed. And we're looking at that. Gears of War and Halo still have the name that holds that weight, but they need to earn fans back into that industry, and they need to drag people from Sony back over to Microsoft. And so, look, we don't have the full details, and realistically, we're not going to make that call until the games actually come out and the reviews start coming in. But for those 2 titles, the big flagships, we're not seeing any reason to believe that Microsoft are winning back people. Jump Force, however, like that's an interesting one that they announced there. Very weird and out of the blue for me. I don't know how you felt about it. It was exciting, but I was confused as to where it came from.
I was a little confused, I won't lie, but that was quickly gone with just pure excitement. I am so excited for Jump Force. They've basically taken Dragon Ball Xenoverse, which I know didn't get the greatest of reviews all the time, but I really enjoyed the Xenoverse games. Number 1 and number 2 didn't quite have enough differences to make it worthwhile, but still enjoyable. They've taken the fighting mechanic from that, which was easy to learn but difficult to master, and you take that and apply it to numerous other anime characters. Like, what were some of the ones we came up with? Luffy, we came up with Naruto, they have Death Note. They have so many other characters thrown in that it's going to be hard for me to dislike this game no matter what the end product is.
Yeah, for me, fighting games, they're hard to get very excited about. I mean, we've had Dragon Ball FighterZ come out, which looked amazing in that, but as someone who loves the old Budokai Tenkaichi games, where like I look at that game and just go, look, I'll get to it one day, but it's a very small market in my opinion. Jump Force, I still feel like it's in that small market where it's exciting. I like to look at it, but I don't really think that I'm going to buy it.
See, I think that's another misconception with it, though, is that it is a small market. When you have just Dragon Ball Z, yeah, fair enough. It's one of the biggest animes around, but you'd limit yourself to only Dragon Ball Z fans. I think they've been extremely smart with throwing out Jump Force, because I know plenty of people that'll watch Death Note but have never watched Naruto, or have watched Naruto and never watched One Piece. You have characters from every aspect of people who watch those series, and at the same time, there've been Netflix series now. Well, not Netflix series, sorry, Netflix movies that are based around those animes. They released Death Note, and they've released the Japanese version of
Full Metal Alchemist?
Yeah, Full Metal Alchemist. And they're not getting, obviously, the greatest of reviews, but a lot of the people who are reviewing them are avid people who watch the series, the anime series. So obviously there's a market there for people enough to criticize what's flawed in things. I reckon there's enough of a fan base to make Jump Force quite a popular game.
Okay. So, well, we can moving on. We can move on to Ubisoft now.
Ubisoft was a little bit hit and miss for me just because they had the very anticipated names of games that you expected, with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I guess, being the biggest one there, in my opinion. I know, Dan, you have a slightly different opinion, but it's set in ancient Greece, carrying on from the previous game, as far as I'm aware from what I've read. But it's an Assassin's Creed game. It's another one of those games where what you see is what you get. Now, they did change a lot with the last one. They changed the gameplay mechanics. They changed a lot of things about it. Whether they carry on and use the exact same things, or whether they try and alter it slightly like they have done between Assassin's Creed games previously, is one of those things where you'll have to wait and see. But I don't know. It's one of those series that changes enough every game that everyone still buys it, but there isn't a massive difference between games as far as I'm concerned with it.
I guess the thing about Assassin's Creed is each title is very based on the era that it's set in. And with the, I guess, rebooting, going back to Origins, Egypt is such an interesting place that there's so much that you can do with it. And there's so many ways that you can learn about it and throw characters in there. Odyssey takes Sparta as the location for it. Now, it's pretty much looking like it's in the middle of the Persian Wars, which is a period where Greece was essentially a bunch of city-states. So Sparta was a city and its own little mini-nation. So was Athens, and they teamed up. Movies like 300 talk about Greece versus Persia. Well, it was essentially Sparta, Athens, and the other city-states around them banding together to fight them. But the important thing about then is this isn't a united Greece. These are very independent places that don't want to be together, but do it out of, I guess, which is the lesser of two evils. So when we look at this, we're looking at Spartan take, and you see the conflict with Athens mentioned in some of the gameplay. There's a lot of great things that can happen in that period of time, and there's a lot of division, and that's what Assassin's Creed is best at. In the past, you had the Templars and Assassins versus Templars. The key thing there is that there's a division between different groups, whereas with this new setting of Sparta, you don't need those factions because the city-states and that had all that division already, and that allows your character to fit into that world very smoothly. What they did do differently is the first time you can actually choose to be a male or female character and have different, dialogue as a result of who your character is. And I think that's very exciting because everyone wants to play a character how they want to, and you want a game to tell you a story. And sometimes that does involve gender, but the ability to have the option is always a great way of including people who may not have liked your character before. Now, whether that's admitting that your storyline wasn't great enough to draw everyone in the first place or not, it's another matter, but it's certainly more inclusive that they have both a male and female character. In saying that, I don't really feel like the female character fits in the era there, because it's very rare that you would have a female person in that kind of time who would be sought out to, do combat roles. But look, you can make that work however you want to. And I think that's the important thing, is including everyone and making a game a game. It's not there to be historically accurate. It's there to be fun. So I like that part of it.
I agree that it's a nice feature. I think that it's one of those things they could have implemented, I guess, in previous games with the whole male-women choice. Like I said, it's not exactly the best era to bring it into. I think with Unity probably would have been the best one to do it. you had the choice between playing as the male or female character as it is, but to choose from the start probably would have been smarter to introduce that particular mechanic. But once again, Assassin's Creed has enough change in its story, like I mentioned, that you don't hesitate to go buy it every year. You just see Assassin's Creed, go, okay, I'm getting it, and then midway through the game you go, this is really similar, but I've already started playing, so I'm going to finish it. The rapid change of errors in games, I think, is what sells that game to the extent that it does. If you were picking extremely random errors that not a lot of people knew much about or knew the historical people in it, it wouldn't be as enjoyable. You had Cleopatra, you had Julius Caesar, you had characters that most people who know anything about history will know. Same with Leonardo da Vinci, you've had George Washington, you've had all these characters that are recognizable, which is, I think, the only real selling point that it still has every single game.
It's very interesting because my favorite out of all the Assassin's Creed has actually been Black Flag. And Black Flag also felt the least like an Assassin's Creed game that I've ever played. In saying that, they've now done Skull and Bones, which is a big part of this whole conference. And essentially, they've taken Black Flag, taken out the assassin, and given you the rest of the game, which is, I guess, what I always felt like with playing that is that it's my favorite Assassin's Creed game, but I really wish it wasn't Assassin's Creed. And now I get that. With Skull and Bones, that's exciting for me. How did you find the details that they announced with Skull and Bones, Corey?
See, I think the era they've put it in is a really, really cool era to base a game around. We will obviously discuss it a bit later, but certain eras are very, very heavily featured in video games nowadays. And I don't know too many, I guess, pirate-based, like, golden age of piracy games that are released by major companies. You have a couple that are released by minor companies, and don't get me wrong, they're not terrible games, and the premise of the game is quite cool. But I think when you take that idea, stick it in a massive company like Ubisoft, it gives so much more to it. And the game being multiplayer is, I guess, a feature I'll judge once I've played a little bit of it, because I would prefer a majority single-player story style game, because I thought it'd just be a lot cooler. But once again, I'll judge it when I play it. Obviously, you have the completely customizable ships, which is a really, really nice feature, because it just gives you your own personal fleet to run. You have to take lucrative trade routes, rivals, you take down legendary pirate captains. Like you mentioned, the reference to it being Black Flag without assassins, you're not far off. You still have the whole boss battle style and historical characters, but it's based completely around that era, not that era with an added element. On a completely different note from that, though, we do have the only other main talking point from that particular panel, which was the release of Good and Evil 2, Beyond Good and Evil 2, which prequel to the original game, which was released 15 years ago. So I'm very sort of torn with this game, because I played a little bit of the original and it wasn't terrible. It was quite a good game, but there's such a gap between the original and this one that I think the idea to make it a prequel, not a sequel, was an extremely good idea, because you don't have to try and continue a story that you're sort of lost on and not many people would probably remember. But I know I've said it a lot with a lot of these games, but it's basically what E3 is, which is basically, I'm going to judge it when I see it, but this has given me somewhat of an idea of what to expect.
Yeah, I think the game that they made originally, number one, it maybe was limited by the technology available at the time. And when you look at this one, there's so much that goes into it. You can see a lot of passion and a lot of things that I feel like if they'd had the chance to, they wanted to do with the first one. Now, in saying that, we don't have the full details of gameplay and all those kind of things, but you watch the trailers, you're looking at what they're doing with everything, and like you can sense that there's something big happening with this. And I feel like this is one of those titles that has the chance to be up there as a talking point, like God of War, like Horizon Zero Dawn, games like that just really took you on a ride with them. I feel like this could be one of those games, but I really don't think we're going to know until it actually comes out.
The only details they've really given, aside from the trailer and that sort of thing, is asked a couple of questions about previous characters from the game, the original, and they've basically tried to put it off as it's going to be a prequel, but at the same time it's going to be a completely side story that only has references in the new story. They've said, and this is a quote from them, you don't play them, but they are in the world and they are key to making this world unique. The DNA will be there. What I take from that is that the game will have its same core elements, but completely restructured, like you said, because of the new technology.
Yeah, I think the thing that we need to keep in mind with this game is that there's already some controversy happening with it. You look at the creative submissions program that they have, which has a budget of about $50,000, where they're looking at people to submit artwork, music, and things like that, which in a utopian world, that works out perfectly because people are like, oh, I want to create something for this, and they throw their work at it. What they're really looking at, and the debate is actually centered around, is that essentially they're trying to skim work that they should be paying proper artists and musicians, things like that. And instead of paying them, adequate dollars, they're trying to find people who will do the work for very cheap, and who will submit the work to them to get into the game, just so that their name can be part of this game and they can go as part of their resume, look, I was on this game, like this is my work. It's an industry that is very heavy on portfolios and a lot of people are looking for work within it. So when these opportunities come up, there's a lot of people that have high level skills who will submit work to it that should probably be getting paid quite well for it, but instead will do it just to get their name out there so that they can get one step further. So considering there's already controversy with how they're going about this game, I don't expect it to be the last time we hear controversy with it.
No, but at the same time, I feel as though any company can turn around and go, look, we have this budget, we want your ideas, your artwork, your music. And I feel a little bit perturbed about it just because they do actually have a listed composer and a listed writer, which I don't think you can have when you're taking quite a bit of work from other random people. But at the same time, if people want to submit their work, that's completely up to them. No one from Beyond Good and Evil is saying, look, you have to do it. And I understand that it's a bit unfair to have their work be published in a game but get very little recognition for it. And I completely understand that, and I agree with that. But they made a choice to do it. You can't blame the game and the company for it when it's completely free to the consumer to do so.
Yeah, I think the point is that they know what they're doing, and they know that they're going to get people who are desperate for work that can't find it. And instead of paying someone that they should be paying for it, they're using this as a way of getting it for very cheap. Like I said, this could turn out any manner of way, but the warning signs are already there with it, and there's a lot of articles already that I'm seeing and a lot of discussion about it. So it's obviously not the first time this has happened, and it's safe to say that they knew what they were doing when they announced this program. So the controversy's there. How that plays out, we may never hear about the controversy again. There may be no further controversy. This may just go smoothly from now on. But from experience, when there's smoke, there's fire, and I would expect more controversy to happen somewhere along the lines with this game.
I was going to say, this is becoming a regular occurrence, though, in, I guess, modern, not just games, but in music and TV and that sort of stuff, because there's been artists that have done entire music videos without spending a dollar just to put people's name in the credits. They could have paid directors, they could have paid a lot of other people, but instead of doing that, they've just gone, I'm going to walk up to random people, ask them if I put their name in the credits, whether I can borrow a mansion. It's just the way, I guess, that side of thing works now. So you can't sort of throw stones at one, but praise another for doing it.
Yeah, I don't know that there is praise on the other side for it. I think the people that are criticizing this are criticizing it in general because, you know, like I said, the notion is a good notion. In a utopian world, anyone can draw their picture and submit it and hope it gets, part of this game. But the reality is that we know that highly skilled people are going to do this for very little money, and that the industry is creating this as a norm, and it's destroying part of that industry. But like I said, we'll see how it plays out, and it's one of those games that you're just going to keep watching until, it gets released, and we'll see how the controversy went. And, like I said, this could be God of War level, it could be, Horizon Zero Dawn. But in saying that, I don't remember hearing any controversy at any point during those games being created.
All right, so we're gonna stop it there for the time being, and hopefully the next episode will be part 2 of E3. I hope you guys all enjoyed listening to the podcast tonight, and I hope everyone from Dan, Corey here, we bid you all a good time. See yous.